10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 248. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 248 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you are all doing well out there. Hope you have gotten your assignments done from last week, because today we are going to jump into a brand new chord progression. This is one of the most common modulations, not only in jazz, but in music in general. So this is going to be one that you're definitely going to want to be able to handle in a way that makes sense. Now, before we jump into the show, as always, I wanted to let you know you can get the PDF worksheet from this episode in all keys for all instruments, as well as the audio examples from the episode removed and put into their own tracks, and some backing tracks as well, by going to our Patreon site. Our Patreon site is a way for you to support this show directly and keep it coming at you week in and week out. And it only costs a couple of bucks a month. So if you haven't checked that out yet, you can go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today, and you get instant access. We've got one more person that has joined up this week, so thank you to Mark for becoming a $5 patron. We really appreciate that, and as always, we appreciate everybody over there. We've got almost 400 people supporting the show on a monthly basis, so jump in on that. Again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you can learn all about the different levels of support, what it gets you, and get yourself signed up. All right, so let's jump into today's episode. So last week we talked about a very common modulation in jazz standards, and that is going from the key of the 1 to the key of the 4. This week, we're going to talk about another just as common, maybe even more common modulation. What we're going to talk about is going from a major key and modulating to its relative minor. Now, if you're not familiar with the term relative minor, let me explain that really quick. So the reason that we call these two keys relatives is that they share a key signature. So let's look at the key that we're going to be going over this week. We're going to be talking about the key of B flat major, just as we did last week. And we are going to modulate to the key of G minor. And we call these two keys relatives because they share a key signature. Just like relatives share a last name, the relative majors and minors share a key signature. So you could think about the key signature as a family name, and that tells us that they are related. So a quick shortcut to figure out the relative minor to any major key is simply look at that major key, go up to the 6th note in the scale, and that is your relative minor. You could also think about it like this. If you're in a major key, go down a minor third, and that's going to be your relative minor. So those are two quick ways to either come up with the relative minor based off of a major, or when you're analyzing a tune and you see a key change, that's a quick way to understand whether it is this particular modulation that we're talking about. Now, since these two keys share a key signature, this is a really common modulation. We hear this all the time, and it really makes sense to the ear. That's another reason that this modulation comes up a lot in jazz standards. And as I said, in a lot of different music, you hear this in any genre of music, you'll hear this modulation a lot. So if you can learn to hear it and identify it, this one's going to pay off a lot because you're really going to come across this on a very regular basis. Okay, so I mentioned we're going to be looking at the key of B flat major and G minor. So first let's hear a B flat major chord. Now let's hear a G minor chord. Now already you might be thinking to yourself, I've heard that sound a lot. Again, here's B flat major. Here's G minor. Now, it actually doesn't sound too bad to go right from a B flat major chord to a G minor chord, right from the major to the relative minor. But most of the time in practice, the composer is going to prepare for that modulation. So let's figure out how this is going to appear the majority of times that you see this particular modulation. So again, what we want to do is we want to prepare for the new key by playing a cadence in that new key. So if we think about the key of G minor, let's think about what a 2-5-1 would be in the key of G minor. So the 2 chord would be A, and what we're going to do is we're going to make this an A half diminished chord, so an A minor 7 flat 5. And then we're going to follow that up with the 5 chord in the key of G, which is a D7 flat 9. Now you notice this isn't just a regular 2-5-1, this is what we call a minor 2-5-1. So we are lowering the 5th of the 2 chord and we are flatting the 9 on the 5 chord, and this really lends itself to the sound of a cadence that's moving to a minor key. And we're actually going to explore that relationship as we go through. So now what we have, instead of just going from B flat major right to G minor, we're going to prepare for that key of G minor by playing a 2-5-1. And that's going to get the ear used to and prepared for what's coming. So now we have B flat major. Then we're going to go to that A minor 7 flat 5 to the 5 chord, which is D7 flat 9. Then we're going to resolve and change the key to G minor. So listen to that sequence of chords one more time. B flat major. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, again, I've heard that before, and you'd be right. That happens in a ton of different tunes. So the way that we are going to work our example lines is 2 measures of B flat major 7, 1 measure of the A minor 7 flat 5, 1 measure of the D7 flat 9, and then we're going to arrive to that key of G minor. Right? So let's look at some interesting note relationships here and how we can highlight certain notes just like we did last week to lead us seamlessly from the major key into its relative minor. So let's talk about first the 3rd of the B flat major 7 chord. So the 3rd would be D. Now what we want to do is when we move to that A minor 7 flat 5 chord, we're going to move that D up a half step to E flat, which is going to be the flatted 5th of the A minor 7 flat 5. So if we go from D over the B flat chord to E flat over the A minor 7 flat 5 chord, it sounds like this. And there's that half-step relationship that we see so often in jazz. Now let's think about when we go to the D7 flat 9 chord, we're going to keep that E flat, which will become the flat 9 over our D7 flat 9 chord. We get a nice bit of tension there. So this is really nice. We're building our level of tension as we move through the progression, as we get closer to the resolution. So over the B flat chord, I'm going to use D, over the A chord, E flat, and then I'm going to keep that E flat over the D7 flat 9 chord. It's going to sound like this when we put it all together. D, E flat, keep the E flat. Now what we're going to do is when we resolve to that G minor chord, we're going to go back to a D, which is going to be the 5th of the minor chord. So this one's kind of nice. We start on D, we move up to E flat, and then we move back to D. So the whole progression sounds like this. And what we want to do is we want to highlight those 2 notes, the concert D and the concert E flat, when we come up with our example lines. So what I've done in the PDF examples is I've highlighted the use of the D moving to the E flat, moving back to the D. And I want you to really focus on those notes as I play these 2 examples. So let's check out example number 1 and hear how seamless this is and how I'm really heavily using the D, the E flat, and then the D again. Here's example number 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So my goal in that line is to make the modulation, what I'm playing over the modulation, as smooth and inconspicuous as possible, right? If I have to sort of like reset my line and start a new phrase whenever a modulation happens, that's really going to interrupt the flow of my improvisation. So what I want to be able to do is seamlessly flow from one chord to another and highlight those really, really important notes so that the modulation doesn't sound like a modulation at all. It just sounds like I'm playing a melody and I'm continuing that melody that I'm playing right through the modulation without any interruption. So that's what I want you to observe in that first line and in this second line. So let's check out this second one. Again, I've color coded it. It's a completely different flow, but I think it is seamless, just like the first one. So let's check out what the second line sounds like. Again, pay attention to that concert D, moving up to the concert E flat, moving back to the concert D as the line goes along. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. One, two, 1, 2, 3. So again, hopefully you can hear my use and my planning of those lines. And the real trick here is to write enough of these lines so that eventually you don't even have to think about it. You can do it in action while you're soloing. So I've got a couple of different assignments for you this week. First, I want you to write 2 lines similar to what I wrote. So you want to highlight those same notes as you go through the modulation and see if you can come up with a smooth way to modulate from the major key to its relative minor. Then what I want you to do is I want you to find 2 jazz standards that use this modulation. And I'm guessing that most of you out there that have been listening to this show for a while and have learned some of the same tunes that we've presented on this show will already know at least 2 tunes that have this modulation in it. But if you don't, I want you to go digging a little bit and see if you can find this, because it is a really common one. You're going to find a lot of instances of this. And that is going to be like your critical thinking portion of your assignment for this week. And again, the goal is to be able to look at a tune and understand when some of these common modulations happen without even really having to think about it or burn too many brain cells. We want to just be able to recognize them on the fly and employ some of our ideas and tactics and voice leading principles to these right away. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. You can get in touch with me on Facebook in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Really get your hands on these PDFs for this week so you can study them before you start to write your own lines. But the act of writing your own lines is really where you're going to get the most out of this episode, so do not ignore that. Through writing these lines, you're really going to understand how the modulation sounds and how it works, and you are going to become accustomed to it in a way that you won't if you just observe the lines, play the lines, and don't write any of your own. Okay? So I hope everybody's doing well out there. Look forward to seeing your lines, hearing your work, and we will talk to you soon. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy. Bye, everybody.